Sorry, I'm a bit late to the party. I've just realised that Jim Jordan is not particularly good or competent at the job that I think he's being paid to do. Now you may wonder, what is that job? No, it's not look for sound bites to appear on Fox News. It's not to carry the toilet paper and basically use his tongue as the person that cleans up the mess coming out of Trump's backside passage. No, that is not Jim Jordan's job. It's not even to pretend he didn't see things that may or may not have happened around a wrestling changing room. No, Jim Jordan's sole purpose, actually it's not even to wear a yellow tie, blue shirt. Jim Jordan's sole purpose in life is basically to be a punchbag for the Dems. Because try again, he just fails. It's like happy slappy, Jim Jordan, slap, bish, bang, bang, wallop.
My condemnation of the attempted murder of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That should go without saying. I am grateful that no one appears to have been physically injured in the vandalism incidents described in the resolution, and that law enforcement took Justice Kavanaugh's would-be assassin into custody before he could complete an act of violence. In a democracy, violence is never the answer to a political dispute, and it should be roundly condemned in all its forms. This resolution, however, is a transparent partisan ploy that is a woefully and unacceptably inadequate condemnation of violence. It comes in the context of extremist MAGA Republicans' effort to enact a total ban on abortion at both the state and federal levels. And in what appears to be a glaring omission to H. Con Res. 3, my Republican colleagues refused to condemn the long-documented history of violence, murder, and mayhem perpetrated by anti-abortion extremists against abortion providers and their patients. According to the National Abortion Federation, since 1977, anti-abortion extremists have been responsible for 11 murders, 42 bombings, 196 arsons, 491 assaults, and thousands of incidents of criminal activities directed at patients, providers, and volunteers. Sadly, these incidents have increased dramatically in recent years. In 2021, abortion providers faced a 600% increase in stalking incidents, a 450% increase in clinic blockades, a 163% increase in reports of hoax devices or suspicious packages, a 129% increase in invasions, and a 128% increase in assault and battery compared to previous years. In some cases, violence against abortion providers has had deadly consequences. For example, in November 2015, a gunman murdered 3 people and injured 9 others when he opened fire with an assault-style rifle at a Planned Parenthood health center in Colorado Springs. In January 2021, a gunman attacked the Planned Parenthood clinic in Knoxville, Tennessee, and later that year, the same clinic was burned to the ground by arsonists. Regardless of your position on abortion rights, it is important that we condemn all acts of violence, regardless of who is the ultimate target. I'm concerned that by refusing to condemn violence against providers, this resolution will inadvertently send a signal to anti-abortion extremists that violence against abortion providers is justified by the vandalism described in the resolution. If this inadequate resolution could potentially fan the flames of political discord, what purpose then does it serve? The only purpose I can infer is that it is intended to placate the extreme elements of the anti-abortion movement while this Republican majority figures out how to pass a total nationwide ban on abortion. Let me be clear. Democrats stand with the majority of the American public and will oppose such a radical position. H. Con Res. 3 is nothing more than a partisan political ploy designed to advance an extreme anti-abortion agenda and is not a serious effort to condemn political violence. Indeed, it may have the opposite effect on the American public because it purposely fails to condemn the thousands of threats, violent incidents, and attacks that abortion providers and patients have endured for decades at the hands of anti-abortion extremists. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from
To vote no, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserved. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, what purpose? Says it right in the title, expressing the sense of Congress condemning the recent attacks on pro-life facilities, groups, and churches. Over 100 churches and pro-life facilities have been attacked in the last 7 months. Over 100. That's all this resolution. I don't know. Republicans condemn violence every time it happens. We condemn it when it happens to abortion clinics. We condemn it when it happens to churches. We condemn it when it happens to pro-life centers. We condemn it when it happened in the summer of 2020 all over the country. We condemned it when it happened on January 6th. We condemn it every single time. This is just highlighting what has happened in the last 7 months with churches and pro-life centers around the country. That's simple. I wouldn't know why this should be unanimous. I recognize my friend, the sponsor of this great legislation from Louisiana, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chairman Jim Jordan. I rise today to speak in favor of my common sense legislation, the House concurrent resolution.
And would that first instance be trying to come to agreement as to when and how documents and information could be given?
Absolutely. The public sees hearings, but does not see that when the process works properly, there's a back and forth and a give and take between the two parties at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, as I said before.
Would you say 2 weeks into the Congress issuing subpoenas might be a bit premature for the investigation and cooperation between those branches of government?
Certainly, Congressman, Congress has the authority to issue subpoenas quickly if they wish, but I guess you get more flies with honey than with vinegar, to be cute. And working with the other side collaboratively is always going to be a better approach.
Vinegar seems to work better on social media, though, than the honey. I yield back.
I think the gentlelady, I would just point out, we tried the honey. 100 letters we sent in the last Congress. We tried the honey.
The last Congress. You're now the chair.
The honey didn't work.
You're now in the majority. You should have tried that first as the chair of this committee, not as the ranking member.
We tried. We
you didn't
tried
do
with
that
100
as
and some
chairman.
letters.
You didn't.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the state of Wyoming, Ms. Hageman.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. It is a privilege to serve on this select subcommittee, and I look forward to the work we have ahead of us. After over
we hope that is coming shortly. We now recognize Representative Raskin for his testimony.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, dear colleagues, our framers were Enlightenment thinkers who wrote us an Enlightenment Constitution. They wanted government to operate on the basis of facts, science, and common sense, not ignorance and superstition. They wanted America to usher in an age of reason. With the separation of powers, the framers constitutionalized Newton's third law of motion, checking every action with an equal and opposite reaction. And Congress in Article 1 was given the central role of legislating and making progress for our people. The oversight function is not specified in Article 1, but the Supreme Court has always said that it's implied, something necessary and proper for the legislative function. As Madison famously said, those who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. Dear colleagues, your subcommittee could conceivably become part of a proud history of serious bipartisan oversight stretching from the Teapot Dome investigation to the Boeing investigation, to the Watergate hearings, to the tobacco hearings, to the Select Committee on the January 6th attack. Or it could take oversight down a very dark alley filled with conspiracy theories and disinformation, a place where facts are the enemy and partisan destruction is the overriding goal. Millions of Americans already fear that weaponization is the right name for this special subcommittee, not because weaponization of the government is its target, but because weaponization of the government is its purpose. What's in a name? Well, everything is here. The odd name of the Weaponization Subcommittee constitutes a case of pure psychological projection. When former President Donald Trump and his followers accuse you of doing something, they're usually telling you exactly what their own plans are. By establishing a select subcommittee on weaponization, they're telling us that Donald Trump's followers, who obviously control the subcommittee, will continue weaponizing any part of the government they can get their hands on to attack their enemies, defined as anyone who stands in the way of their quest for power. To be clear, that's not an exclusively partisan operation. They've proven that they will weaponize the government not just against the other party, but against anyone who refuses to bend to the will and whim of one Donald Trump, whether that's a lifelong Republican state election official like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a foreign head of state like President Zelensky, a political movement like Black Lives Matter, a once close personal friend and ally of Trump's like his personal lawyer Michael Cohen for many years, or even a sycophantic Trump cabinet appointee and lifelong Republican like Attorney General William Barr, if these people break from the habits of lying and lawlessness that define life as a camp follower in the cult of Donald Trump. But if the weaponized MAGA campaign isn't exactly partisan, it is entirely political because it's got an overriding electoral focus, and you know what it is. It's all about restoring Donald Trump, the twice impeached former president, to the office he lost by 7 million votes in 2020 and tried to steal back in a political coup and violent insurrection against our constitutional order on January 6, 2021. You disagree? Well, please don't take my word for it. As our chairman might say, just listen to what Chairman Jordan himself had to say 6 months ago at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas, where he was predicting GOP victory in the 22 elections and promising that oversight of Hunter Biden's laptop and the claim that the federal government is treating moms and dads, like the ones in this room, like terrorists, would be the centerpiece of the GOP's work in the House when they got it back into power. Relaxing with a friendly interviewer, Chairman Jordan gave the game away entirely. Quote, "All those things need to be investigated just so you have the truth," he said. Plus, that will help frame up the 2024 race when I hope and I think President Trump is going to run, and we need to make sure that he wins. We need to make sure that he wins. This call to arms for the 2024 presidential election was met with wild applause from the CPAC audience. I urge every member of this subcommittee to go and watch the interview. Now, of course, a serious bipartisan committee focused on weaponization of the government would zero in quickly on the Trump administration itself, which brought weaponization to frightening new levels across the board. Consider just a few examples I have time for, illustrative of dozens I can provide the subcommittee. One, in a 6-week period in 2020, Donald Trump fired or removed 5 different departmental inspectors general simply for doing their jobs and not caving into Trump's coercive political demands to cover up different forms of administration wrongdoing and misconduct. April 3rd, 2020, Trump informed Congress he was firing Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson, who had received a whistleblower complaint in August 2019 about improper demands made by Trump to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. In May 2020, Trump fired Steve Linick, IG of the State Department, later claiming he had no idea who he was and saying that he fired him only at Secretary Pompeo's request. That inspector general was investigating Pompeo's decision to bypass Congress in sending billions of dollars in arms to Saudi Arabia. I don't have time to get into the details of the others, but May 20, he fired Mitch Bem, the transportation deputy IG. He relieved of duty Glenn Fine, acting IG for the Defense Department. He removed Christy Grimm, the acting inspector general of HHS. Second, breaching the traditional separation between the president and Department of Justice criminal prosecutions, Trump and his obliging sycophantic attorney generals, like Jeff Sessions and William Barr, repeatedly pressured career prosecutors to go hard or go soft in particular cases, always seeking to reward Trump's friends or to punish his enemies. If weaponization of the Department of Justice has any meaning, this is it. Consider the egregious case of Gregory Craig, a White House counsel under Obama, who was targeted by the DOJ for alleged FARA violations and finally indicted on a single count of making false statements. He was acquitted unanimously by the jury in less than 5 hours, and one of his lawyers observed that the Department of Justice had hounded his client without any evidence and without any purpose. Former U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman said that Greg Craig never should have been prosecuted. Consider the case of Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer and confidant for many years. In August 2018, he pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations over large hush money payments he arranged before the 2016 election to keep porn star Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal from talking about sexual affairs they had with Donald Trump. You guys remember this one? Well, after Barr became Attorney General in February of 2019, he worked to kill further investigations related to those payoffs and suggested that Mr. Cohen's conviction on campaign finance charges itself be reversed, even though 6 months had already passed since Cohen had entered a guilty plea. Amazingly, after Cohen was imprisoned for a year and then being transferred out of prison to home confinement during COVID-19, Barr and the DOJ intervened to block his transfer because Cohen would not immediately accept as a condition of his ankle bracelet home confinement not to engage in First Amendment activities, specifically writing and publishing a book about Donald Trump or saying anything in public on TV or in the social media about Donald Trump. Cohen had already been home for 2 weeks when this unconstitutional demand from DOJ appeared, and when he and his attorney dared to ask questions about it, 3 federal marshals showed up with handcuffs and shackles, and he was returned to the Otisville Correctional Institute. There he spent 16 days in solitary confinement before they were able to get his case before a federal district judge who immediately found that Barr's purpose, quote, in transferring Cohen from release on furlough and home confinement back to custody was retaliatory in response to Cohen desiring to exercise his First Amendment rights to publish a book critical of the president and to discuss the book on social media. Can you think of a more egregious example of weaponizing the Department of Justice for nakedly political purposes than imprisoning and putting in solitary confinement the president's own former lawyer simply because he wanted to exercise his First Amendment rights? Consider the John Durham investigation. At the urging of Republicans, including the good chairman, the John Durham Special Counsel investigation was set up in 2019 by Barr to try to find wrongdoing by intelligence or law enforcement agencies in the origins of the Mueller investigation. And we've heard some of the murmurings about this today. After 4 years and millions of dollars spent, the Durham investigation closed as a total flop without unearthing anything like the deep state conspiracy that Republicans have been denouncing around here for years. It couldn't find anything of substance to it. Yet Barr and Durham kept pressing in clearly abusive ways. I hope your subcommittee will investigate. One former DOJ prosecutor, Robert Luskin, a defense lawyer who represented 2 witnesses before the Durham probe, told the New York Times he was shocked. This stuff had my head spinning, he said. When did these guys drink the Kool-Aid, and who served it to them? Amazingly, when prosecutors participating in this wild goose chase actually came into possession of evidence of a real offense from Italian government officials of a potentially major financial crime committed by Donald Trump, Durham was suddenly deputized to investigate it, and the whole investigation mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Trump's enablers now want this subcommittee not to examine the Durham debacle as a case study in dangerous weaponization of the justice function, but rather to pick up the baton from the defeated and demoralized Durham team and to keep the wild goose chase going today. Third, the former president had no qualms about literally weaponizing our nation's law enforcement and military against First Amendment activity for his political purposes. I commend to you the debacle that took place on June 1st, 2020 in Lafayette Square, where they mobilized an interagency law enforcement troop and then unleashed them on horseback with pepper spray and batons, billy clubs, rubber bullets against a totally lawfully present crowd. Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that any of the investigations that have taken place during the last 2 years have been perfect. I'm sure they could have been improved in some ways. That's a legit thing for you to ask. But it's one thing to engage in systematic oversight driven by a commitment to facts and the truth, and something radically different to set up a platform for a series of hit-and-run partisan attacks that are just vindictive, vendetta-driven, and meant to frame up a presidential campaign in 2024. And some of the new rhetoric we've been hearing can be dangerous, as the ranking member was pointing out. After the execution of a perfectly lawful judicial search warrant in Palm Beach in August of last year, politicians and media figures began denouncing the FBI, the whole FBI and FBI agents, in vitriolic terms. And since then, the FBI and DHS have observed an increase in violent threats posted on social media against federal officials and facilities, including a threat to place a dirty bomb in front of FBI headquarters and issuing general calls for civil war and armed rebellion. And we've heard those calls before in this chamber. On August 11th, last year, a person wearing a technical vest and armed with an AR-style rifle and nail gun attempted to forcibly enter the FBI Cincinnati field office. When officers responded, he fled the scene and a pursuit followed. During a prolonged standoff with the FBI, the man fired multiple shots at Ohio State Highway Patrol. Mr. Chairman, the public is skeptical about this strange new venture with the strange new name that's being launched, because so many of the members involved have done everything they can to block the January 6th committee's investigation of the worst insurrectionary domestic violent attack on an American election in the American Congress in our history. And the public wonders whether members who refuse to comply with congressional subpoenas themselves should be issuing congressional subpoenas to other people. Oversight must be organized around a comprehensive search for the truth that will lead to progress, and not around revenge, which will lead us as a country to chaos and ruin. I hope the subcommittee will find a way to embark upon a truly bipartisan agenda with all members participating and agreeing on a common agenda, and I wish you well and Godspeed on behalf of this difficult venture that you are about to proceed on.
I thank the gentleman, and I can assure the gentleman from Maryland that we respect the FBI agents, particularly the ones who have come to us, the dozens who have come to us, and we will focus on the facts, something I felt was not exactly presented in the proper.
Recognize Mr. Goldman for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that Mr. Palmer was asking some questions about some of my assertions about the removal of the Ukrainian prosecutor general. First, let's be clear, I did not say that Vice President Biden fired Mr. Shokin. It was official U.S. and European policy to encourage Ukraine to fire him, which they did. But he is right about one thing. What I say is not evidence, and neither is what any of our Republican colleagues say on the other side of the aisle. They may not like what these witnesses say, but the testimony of the witnesses is the evidence, not baseless statements without firsthand knowledge. But I urge Mr. Palmer, if he wants to understand what actually happened, to read the 300-page report that we published on the first impeachment investigation. There's a lot in there about Mr. Shokin. Luckily, though, he doesn't even have to do that. You can just read the New York Post story itself, because in that story, Shokin admitted that he never opened an investigation into Burisma. He claims to have had, quote, specific plans to do so. Yeah, sure. For 2 years, Rudy Giuliani had been peddling Victor Shokin's bogus story, including with agents of Russian intelligence. And Chairman Comer, if you question that, I urge you to look up Andrei Derkach. So who was the sole source of the hard drive to the New York Post? Rudy Giuliani. And for these reasons, many journalists were highly skeptical. One reporter at the New York Post itself refused to put his name on the story. Fox News' Brett Baer said, quote, "The whole thing is sketchy," unquote. And both Giuliani and the Post refused to give the laptop to other journalists to verify and analyze it. In fact, Giuliani told the New York Times that he hoped that it would be published before it could be verified. So what is the so-called authentication for this laptop? Well, Chairman Comer said in his opening statement that it's a subpoena to the computer repair shop owner, which happened over about a year before the New York Post story. But that is not the same hard drive that Rudy Giuliani received months later from that repair shop owner and passed along to the New York Post after he was in possession of it for several months. Now, Mr. Baker, based on your understanding of Russian malign influence campaigns, does Russian intelligence have the capacity to manipulate a hard drive?
Yes.
So
it is possible that some of the materials on a hard drive could be authentic, and some could be altered, manipulated, or even added to the hard drive. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Mr. Roth, you have testified today that Twitter was keenly aware of the hacking efforts by Russia in connection with the 2016 election. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And those efforts, I believe you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, by Russian intelligence to interfere in our electoral process continued up and through and including the 2020 election. Is that right?
Russian efforts certainly continued through the 2020 election and even through the midterms. I couldn't say specifically if it was military intelligence, as was the case in 2016, but certainly the Russian government was involved.
So let's run down what Twitter knew about this hard drive and this story when it was published. First, the sole source of the hard drive was Rudy Giuliani, who had been working closely with Russian intelligence agents throughout 2020. Second, Russian intelligence interfered in the 2016 election and was actively trying to do it again. And third, numerous journalists, including at the New York Post and Fox News, raised suspicions about the hard drive, and they refused to allow an independent analysis and verification of it. Now, Mr. Baker, based on your experience in law enforcement, wouldn't this give anyone concerned about Russian interference in our elections serious pause?
Well, I think as reflected in the public record, at the time, I thought there were great concerns on that side of the equation, because in part with respect to all the things that had happened since 2016 with respect to the hack and leak or hack and dump issues, there were facts that indicated that the computer might have been abandoned and so on, but which made it a very difficult case, which is why we're sitting here today talking about it.
Right, and there was a 24-hour delay in continuing to spread the publication of it. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. You know, that is exactly what 51 former intelligence officials, many from Republican administrations, even the Trump administration, said in that letter that is being distorted by Mr. Jordan and others at this hearing. Let me quote one paragraph of what they say. We want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post by President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement. Just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government played a significant role in this case. And unless Twitter, like Special Counsel Mueller concluded about the Trump campaign in 2016, wanted to welcome Russian interference in an election.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taibbi, I want to ask about journalistic ethics and information sources. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics asserts that journalists should avoid political activities that can compromise integrity or credibility. Being a Republican witness today certainly casts a cloud over your objectivity. But a deeper concern that I have relates to the ethics of how journalists receive and present certain information. Journalists should avoid accepting spoon-fed, cherry-picked information if it's likely to be slanted, incomplete, or designed to reach a foregone, easily disputed, or invalid conclusion. Would you agree with that?
I think it depends.
Really? You wouldn't agree that a journalist should avoid spoon-fed, cherry-picked information if it's likely to be slanted, incomplete, or designed to reach a foregone, easily disputed, or invalid conclusion?
Congresswoman, I've done probably a dozen stories involving whistleblowers. Every reported story that I've ever done across 3 decades involves sources who have motives. Every time you do a story, you're making a balancing test between the public interest.
Reclaiming my time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I ask you this because before you became Elon Musk's hand-picked journalist, and pardon the oxymoron, you stated this on Joe Rogan's podcast about being spoon-fed information, and I quote, "I think that's true of any kind of journalism," and you'll see it behind me here. "I think that's true of any kind of journalism. Once you start getting handed things, then you've lost. They have you at that point, and you got to get out of that habit. You just can't cross that line." Do you still believe what you told Mr. Rogan? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes.
Good. Now, you crossed that line with the Twitter files.
No.
Elon Musk, it's my time. Please do not interrupt me. Elon Musk spoon-fed you his cherry-picked information, which you must have suspected promotes a slanted viewpoint, or at the very least generates another right-wing conspiracy theory. You violated your own standard, and you appear to have benefited from it. Before the release of the emails in August of last year, you had 661,000 Twitter followers. After the Twitter files, your followers doubled, and now it's 3 times what it was last August. I imagine your Substack readership, which is a subscription, increased significantly because of the work that you did for Elon Musk. Now, I'm not asking you to put a dollar figure on it, but it's quite obvious that you've profited from the Twitter files. You hit the jackpot on that Vegas slot machine to which you referred. That's true, isn't it?
I've also reinvested.
You've made some. No. Is it true that you have profited since you were the recipient of the Twitter files? You've made money. Yes or no?
I think it's probably a wash, honestly.
Nope. You have made money that you did not have before, correct?
But I've also spent money that I didn't have before. I just hired a whole group of people to
Patently obvious answer, reclaiming my time. Attention is a powerful drug. Eyeballs, money, prominence, attention, all of it points to problems with accuracy and credibility. And the larger point, which is social media companies are not biased against conservatives, and if anything, they ignored their own policies by allowing Trump and other MAGA extremists to post incessant lies, endangering public safety and even our democracy. Hypocrisy is the hangover of an addiction to attention. Now, I want to point out another alleged finding from the Twitter files. Mr. Schellenberger, you've referenced several times this $3.4 million that the FBI paid to Twitter in 2020 that was referenced in General Counsel Jim Baker's email. I first want to confirm that nowhere in the email does Baker say that the money was paid to censor information, take down posts, suspend accounts, or do anything relating to content moderation. Is that correct?
It is.
Thank you. But honest reporting would have explained that the $3.4 million was paid to release information, not censor it. One of my colleagues on this panel repeated your distortions and told Americans this reimbursement was used to, quote, censor certain stories. That's a flat-out lie. Mr. Schellenberger, are you aware of Section 2706 under the Stored Communications Act? It says when social media companies comply with subpoenas, warrants, or court orders, it costs them money, so they get reimbursed. The FBI makes these requests and reimbursements to discover evidence and run relevant to a criminal investigation. Let me repeat that. The FBI makes these requests to help catch the bad guys. That helps keep child predators off social media sites. It helps keep violent criminals off our streets. I support the FBI and our law enforcement agencies. It would be nice if our Republican colleagues did the same and not fabricate explanations for payments that are defined for clear purposes in federal law. My time is just about wrapped up.
May I respond?
The truth is that social media companies are unregulated monoliths. They pose danger to individuals. They allow posts that bring harm, and that's the bottom line. That the other side will not tell you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman had no time to yield back, but I will let the gentleman, Mr. Schellenberger, respond. And I would also point out that I did not say what the FBI paid Twitter for. All I said was they paid Twitter $3.4 million.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. I didn't ask Mr. Schellenberger a question.
Yeah, but the witness wants to respond, and the witness have been invited our guests, and frankly, they've been attacked by the federal government.
Well, please do that.
I'm going to let Mr. Schellenberger answer that before recognizing Mr. Bishop.
So are you going to do that as we move down the line of questioners?
The gentlelady has not been recognized. You had your 5 minutes, and frankly, I think that's at the discretion of the chair. Mr. Schellenberger, you can respond briefly.
I'll be brief, which is that my understanding from those files is that Twitter had decided not to take that money until recently. So if you read that email, what Stasha, I believe, the person that sent it, is saying is that they started taking money after previously not taking it. And I believe that the reason that they had not taken it earlier was because they did not want that financial conflict clouding their relationship.
Mr. Chairman, the money is payment under federal law so that they can
The gentleman from
costs
North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, is recognized for 5 minutes. The ranking member, her opening statement. I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you. Before my opening statement, Mr. Chairman, as a point of order, it's been my understanding that one of the witnesses has, within the last half an hour, released additional information that the Republicans may, and you as the majority, may have been able to review and have information about. And if that information is, in fact, going to be used at this hearing, I just want the point of order to be recognized that the Democrats have not been able to review or to see any of that information. Will you be using any of the information that has recently been released by, excuse me? Will you be using any of that information?
We'll be using whatever information our staff has put together for us to use at this hearing.
And
I'd
have
expect
you
guys to
had
do the
that
same.
information before this hearing began, before today?
We use all information that is given to our staff, and we will use it to make sure we educate the
And
American people on
information
the
that you have not shared with us?
Oh, we think it was posted online.
Within just this half an hour, the last 20 minutes, but it's not information
Do
that
you want
was
us to
privy
get
to us
you
before
want us to
that.
get you a copy of it? Because we can make a
I
copy
think we
for
can
you.
go online and find a copy. We can look on our Twitter accounts and see it. But I just want the point of order that you have not shared any of that with us. And I understand that you may have been looking at this long before today's hearing.
We obtained it at the same time frame that
Excuse
was
me,
posted online.
before we continue, is one of your colleagues trying to speak to me? Or I think this was a conversation between you and me.
I was speaking to the parliamentarian, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay.
It's the gentlelady's time.
Okay, all right, well.
And I recognize you for an opening statement.
And I had a point of order, which I was asking you to address.
And I answered your question.
Okay, great. Now I will begin my.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet.
First of all, I want to correct the statement my colleague made that my objections were to the substance or content of the two witnesses that are now departed. My objection, as I stated before, was that if we are not going to observe the right to cross-examine witnesses that are providing substantive testimony before this committee, then we should strike that. And that is the practice in federal courts when much is at stake. And it is a device that ensures that when people take a stand and offer evidence, that we can test the veracity of their statements. But that is not the case in this hearing. The chair and the majority have chosen to allow witnesses to offer substantive testimony here and then have allowed them to scurry away and not face cross-examination or the testing of the statements they have made. You know, it's ironic that we began this hearing with a Pledge of Allegiance. We all stood and put our hands on our hearts and looked at the flag. Then we turned around and we eviscerated the very process here that would protect rights, protect the integrity of this hearing, to elicit the truth and to test the statements and testimony that are brought before us. This is such a departure. This is such a departure from regular order and the usual process of congressional hearings that I'm compelled to strike that, to ask to strike that testimony, because it's not worth anything if it can't be tested. Congress or the American people should not be able to rely on that information if it is not tested, not truthful. And so, Mr. Chairman, I resume my motion to adjourn, and I ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman moves to adjourn. The committee will suspend while we prepare to have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Chair, may the time be suspended, please, for that?
It is suspended.
It's still going, clock going down.
Oh, the clock for Mr. Yeah, we will hold the time for Mr.
Thank you.
Lynch. We'll get the clerk out here and we'll have the vote.
Ms. Jordan, point of inquiry.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I've testified before committee even during the 2 years I was out of Congress, and you and I have been here for more than a decade together. Have we ever cross-examined a current U.S. Senator who testified before any committee that you or I were on?
Nope, we have not.
Mr. Chairman, this is debating the point of order.
No, it was as a point of inquiry. I just asked the question of the
Clerk
chairman.
will call the roll on the gentleman's motion from Massachusetts.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? No. Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Massey? No. Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Stewart? Ms. Stefanik? No. Ms. Stefanik votes no. Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Kamak? Ms. Kamak votes no. Ms. Hageman? No. Ms. Hageman votes no. Ms. Pascat? Mr. Lynch?
Yes.
Mr. Lynch votes yes. Ms. Sanchez?
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez votes aye. Ms. Wasserman Schultz?
Aye.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye. Mr. Connolly?
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Garamendi? Mr. Allred? Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Goldman?
Aye.
Mr. Goldman votes aye.
Mr. Chair, how am I recorded?
Ms. Pascat, you are not recorded.
I vote aye.
Ms. Pascat votes aye. Mr. Stewart, you're not recorded. Mr. Stewart votes no.
All members voted. Clerk will report.
Mr. Chair, there are 7 ayes and 12 noes.
Motion fails. The gentleman is recognized for the remainder of his 5
Point
minutes
of
of question.
inquiry. Mr. Chairman, point of
The
inquiry.
gentlelady is recognized from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I think we need to unconfuse the record. I mean, sometimes I hear you talk about Mr. Landry as appearing as a former member of Congress, and sometimes I hear you saying he was Louisiana Attorney General.
Well, those are both true statements.
Those are 2 statements, but in what capacity was he testifying today? As a former member or as an elected state official?
He was testifying as a witness in front of the Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for his 2 minutes and 17 seconds remaining in his 5 minutes of questioning.
In what capacity, sir?
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I should get an answer in what capacity he was here.
He was in the capacity of a witness in front of our committee. That was his capacity.
Attorney General.
Yeah, the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
So is the president now set that any state official that
Precedent's
comes
now
is going
set
to
that
be
the
excused?
gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for the remainder of his 5 minutes of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, I would
Regular
like
order.
an answer.
Mr. Seligman, in the Missouri versus Biden complaint, today's witnesses, who are now departed, claimed that a February 2022 Department of Homeland Security threat bulletin somehow harmed them by warning that online disinformation could lead to real physical threats. I ask unanimous consent to introduce this February 7, 2022 National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin.
Without objection.
Mr. Seligman, this warning obviously was not far-fetched, as evidenced by the events of January 6th. Members of the extremist groups like Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and 3 Percenters did not hesitate in calling for perpetrating violence on the basis of false or misleading election fraud narratives, and we need only to remember the chants of "Hang Mike Pence" outside this U.S. Capitol. I would also underscore that more than 60 lawsuits brought by President Trump and his supporters, especially Rudy Giuliani, following the 2020 presidential election failed because they lacked evidence to support them. Professor Seligman, do you agree that false or misleading narratives about the substantive election fraud could lead to calls for violence around elections?
Yes, I do.
Professor Seligman, the witness that were sitting next to you seemed to think that it is censorship for DHS to warn that online disinformation
matter. I now yield to the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And Chairman, what's interesting to me is that this hearing is about transparency. And my staff has told me that there are multiple documents that you have allowed my staff to look at in camera, meaning they can go look at them, but they cannot have them, documents that you've been given related to an FTC inquiry. And my ask is just that you turn those over to us. It sounds like we are asking you to do what you think these witnesses are not doing. So again, just in the spirit of transparency, we would like those documents. Mr. Dunham.
I'll take it under advisement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunham, following the subpoena you received from the Judiciary Committee Republicans, you offered to meet and confer with them on multiple occasions. Is that right?
We met with the committee in early January on the initial forming of the committee in the new Congress, and then we've had several engagements or outreach since the subpoena.
And what would happen if you violated a subpoena and just didn't show up?
I'm not sure what the consequences would be for me, but we're actively engaged with the committee and intend to do so going forward as well.
Great. Well, thank you for doing what Jim Jordan wasn't willing to do and show up and be responsive. Your good faith effort did not end there, though. In fact, you also offered to work with them to prioritize their document requests. Is that right?
When we received Chairman Jordan's letter on January 17th, we also had a meeting previously scheduled that afternoon with committee staff, more as a meet and greet to kind of talk about the 118th Congress and discuss the topics of interest to the committee to determine what was the primary focus of their interest.
And in addition to that meeting, you allowed them to come in person and review non-public documents. Is that correct?
In response to the subpoena, we provided in-camera review of Guardian documents related to the EDU official tags, which was a substantive production at the core of the subpoena's request.
And these guys viewed those documents?
The documents were reviewed by both majority and minority staff.
And after viewing the documents, and do those documents, by the way, include what we call law enforcement sensitive information?
The documents themselves are law enforcement sensitive. They're law enforcement files. They're tips that we receive from the public and the actions associated with those tips. So yes.
What's the difference between something you call law enforcement sensitive and something that you could put on the front page of the Washington Post?
Something that's purely unclassified versus something that has a law enforcement caveat that is necessary to protect potential investigative equities, witness information, subject information, anything related to sources, methods, techniques, that type of thing.
And after Jim Jordan's team viewed the documents, are you aware of a report that Jim Jordan drafted related to their inquiry?
I'm aware.
And in that report, was it a public report?
I believe it was a public report.
And in that report, did you see any law enforcement sensitive information?
I'm not aware of what information was in the report. I haven't studied it closely enough to determine whether there's law enforcement sensitive information there, but that's something I can certainly get back to you on.
Okay, I'll go back to you with some pieces that we saw that were included in there that would qualify as an unlawful disclosure. Ms. Bumpus, thank you again for also doing something that Jim Jordan would not do and responding to a subpoena. Is it true that you've worked for multiple prior chairs that were Republican and Democratic and even worked for John McCain when you worked on the Hill?
Sorry, yes, Congressman. I did work for John McCain on the Hill prior to coming to the FTC in 2006, and I've worked for 8 chairmen as Director of Congressional Relations for Democrats and for Republicans.
And while you were responsive to the inquiries of the chairman, is it true that you cannot provide information about ongoing or potential investigations?
That is correct. Under the rules of the commission, we cannot disclose non-public information without a vote of the commission.
So would you be committing a crime if you did what Jim Jordan is asking you to do?
I cannot speak today about non-public information or about ongoing investigations.
Thank you. Yield back.
Well, I was just going to say, Ms. Harrison, are you grandstanding?
No, and it seems like, as Madeline mentioned, the other side is here on taxpayer dollars. The least that they could do is listen to our side of it, ask us questions. They brought witnesses in to counter our horrific stories for their agenda. All they want to do is talk about gun legislation. Well, you can have all the gun legislation on the books, but if it's not enforced, which is what Alvin Bragg is doing, then it's not going to matter and people are going to die. And that's why we're here. And I appreciate your oversight because we do need help. And if they continue to ignore it, people are going to continue to die.
Is this committee victimizing you, Ms. Brame, as Democrats said?
Absolutely not. This committee has given me a platform, has given me a seat at the table to be able to tell my story and raise awareness for victims all over, not just New York City, but all over this country, especially from Philadelphia.
Ms. Fisher, if the guns are the problem, why didn't the Democrats fix it?
The Democrats have worked hard to pass
Well, they had control. They controlled all the House, all the Senate. They still have the White House. Why didn't they fix it last Congress?
We need comprehensive gun violence prevention legislation to be passed, and this Congress has the ability and the capacity to do that.
I was in the Congress last session. Mr.
So
Nadler was the chair. They
now.
tried. They could have passed. They didn't pass it.
We need Congress to go back to Washington and pass strong gun violence prevention legislation.
No, I'm going to go to Mr. DiGiacomo. Mr. DiGiacomo, are you grandstanding?
Not at all. Honestly, I'm
You're here representing the detectives of this great town, right?
Absolutely, and very proud of it. I am not here other than to ask for help. Someone just said that we can't do anything here. Well, if the people of the United States Congress can't do anything to help us, we're in a lot of trouble, because there are some powerful people around this table that could help and stop the violence and make the streets safer for the people of New York City and the police officers and detectives that serve them.
Thank you.
We're here for help.
Thank
we
you.
need help.
I thank the gentleman from Texas, and the gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all of the witnesses for being here today.
Would the gentlelady yield for a moment?
Yes, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. I just want to answer Mr. Jordan's question. Last year, when we were in control, the Democrats in the House passed very comprehensive gun control legislation. The Democrats in the Senate voted for very comprehensive gun control legislation, but because of the filibuster, you needed 60 votes, and we got no Republican votes, and that's why it didn't pass. I thank the gentlelady. I yield back.
I echo the statistics that were just offered by the ranking member, Mr. Nadler.
My colleague, Hank Johnson, for yielding time. Mr. Chairman, first I want to express my condolences, my deepest condolences to both Ms. Harrison and Ms. Brain. And Mr. Alba, I was proud to see your community, our community, rally around you and other bodegueros, and I applauded D.A. Bragg's decision to drop the charges against you. During the 80s and 90s, before I was involved in public service, as a regular citizen of New York, I fought crime and drugs during the crack wars in northern Manhattan. During those years, the 34th precinct used to average over 100 homicides. Let me repeat this: over 100 homicides a year. Myself and my family members were held at gunpoint during those years. Held up at gunpoint. I don't know if any of you here have been held up at gunpoint. This is deeply personal to me. This year, the 34th precinct has witnessed 0 homicides. And last year, although far too many, that same precinct in northern Manhattan witnessed 5 homicides. From 100 to 5, and to this year, 0. But let me say something to you, Mr. Chairman. The common denominator in most homicides across the country is a gun. It's a gun. 80% of the homicides in this country are committed by guns. A young man murdered on 137th Street. A gun.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back.
And you guys brandish your paints with AR-15. Reprehensible.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson, is recognized.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Swalwell from California for his 5 minutes question.
Congress. Mr. Secretary, you want to respond to that?
Can I
take 20 seconds?
Yep.
To say that we are doing nothing is an absolute falsehood.
We are taking it to the cartels. Do I think that nearly 58,000 fentanyl overdose deaths in 2020 are quote unquote justifiable? This department has worked to stop the trafficking of narcotics since its very inception. And we both know very well that the drug problem in this country requires a two-pronged approach to address the supply and to address the demand. And this fight continues, and we are taking it to the cartels in an unprecedented way. And Operation Blue Lotus that we launched in the middle of March is one powerful example of what we are doing to only increase our effort to address this scourge that is killing so many Americans. But to say that we are doing nothing is unequivocally false.
Mr. Secretary, you oversee one of the largest law enforcement personnel in America. Is it the position of the Biden administration to fund or defund the police?
It is to fund the police.
And does that include to also train them to catch the bad guys and also not to harm the good guys?
Congressman, that is the sworn oath of officers.
And you would agree that unlike any time before in our history, police officers are in danger today. They have a target on their back, violence committed against them.
Congressman, I know that law enforcement officers are under tremendous attack.
And do you think go ahead, do you think anti-police rhetoric hurts morale or helps morale as you're trying to recruit people to be law enforcement officers?
Congressman, it hurts morale, and that is why it is so important that law enforcement leaders continue to communicate the nobility of the law enforcement profession. I'm very proud to say that.
And does anti-police rhetoric put targets on the back of law enforcement for their safety?
Congressman, it does.
That's why I'm disturbed about a recent tweet from the former president that says Republicans in Congress should defund the Department of Justice and the FBI. I'm also concerned about people on this committee and their own anti-police rhetoric. This is a defund the FBI campaign effort. Again, thousands of FBI agents who work hard every day to take bad guys off the streets. In fact, after the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago, someone armed to the teeth went to an FBI field office to try and kill FBI agents. I'm also concerned that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee invited a witness. When you could have any person who walks this earth as a chairman of a committee to come in and testify, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee invited the author of this tweet.
Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Chairman.
Personal inquiry.
He's not yielding. The gentleman is recognized.
So it concerns me that there is this anti-police rhetoric that's happening among some in the MAGA Republican Party because they vote against police funding that was included in the COVID relief package. They vote against police reform efforts that would put millions of dollars in community police officers on our street. They vote and are against the union protections that allow them to collectively bargain. And as we honor the hundreds of January 6th officers who were hurt that day, too many of them gave comfort and aid at the DC jail. I also want to ask, is anti-Semitism on the rise in America, Mr. Secretary?
Congressman, yes, it is.
And are we seeing increases in violence toward Jewish Americans?
Congressman, yes, we are, and we are seeing that for other minority groups as well.
And so when an influencer like Kanye West, who has millions of followers on social media, says that he's going to declare DEFCON 3 on the Jews, do you think that increases threats to Jewish Americans or decreases threats?
Words like that increase the threat to minority groups, Congressman.
And that's why it surprises me that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee tweeted out, Kanye, Elon, Trump. Well, we know what Trump thinks about law enforcement and what is happening in law enforcement right now with targets on their back. But this tweet was kept up for months after Kanye West said that he was going to declare DEFCON 3 on the Jews. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that all of us have a responsibility to elevate our rhetoric and to denounce anti-Semitism and anti-police rhetoric in this country so that Jewish Americans and police officers can be safer?
Congressman, I do.
Thank you, and I yield back.
To stand for freedom and defend it if we do that.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will not yield. I will yield back my time.
Can you yield to me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yield to the chairman. I thought I couldn't interpret what you're wearing.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It seems to me that the amendments offered by our friends on the other side would keep what we currently have, the status quo, wouldn't change what's going on now. And what's going on now? Chaos.
Right.
We know it's chaos. It's been chaos for 28 months. There's no number, there's no figure, there's no stat, there's nothing you can look at that says it's not a chaotic situation. And the Democrats' amendments say, let's keep that in place. I think we should probably change it. That's what Mr. McClintock's bill does. It's combined bills that make the system work. Actually let legitimate asylum seekers get their adjudication done and enter the country from communist countries for wherever they come. But you got to do it the right way. You got to do it in a way consistent with the law. That's what this does. We heard from a sheriff in Yuma who said, 30 years in law enforcement in Arizona, said, what is the situation on the border? He said, it's the worst it's been in my 30 years in law enforcement. And that has happened. Mr. McClintock gave the numbers at the start of our hearing today. That has happened in literally 28 months, and it started on day one. And the Democrats say, keep that in place. I think the country wants us to change it. And guess what's happening? There's a whole caravan of more people coming when Title 42 goes away. We should maybe demonstrate that we're trying to fix the problem, and that's what this bill does. And I want to thank Mr. Johnson, Mr. McClintock, and our whole team who worked on this to put together something that changes the chaos that we all know is currently happening on our southern border.
Mr. Chairman, to reclaim my time, 10 seconds. I authored the asylum provisions of this bill.
Yep.
And I've been bringing this language since I got to Congress 7 years ago. It's about time we fix it so that it will work again. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California seeks recognition.